The galaxy had forgotten what freedom tasted like. For more than 10,000 years, every planet, every moon, every species that looked up at the stars knew one truth: Vorlak the Eternal ruled them all. His face, if it could even be called that, was carved into the mountains of conquered worlds, and his voice echoed through the cold metal halls of the Grand Obedience Council. He did not simply command, he controlled. Every star system had his enforcers, cold machines with minds older than most civilizations, and every time a new species dared to rise, they were reminded of their place beneath his throne. Those who resisted vanished. Planets were turned into silent graves. Cities crumbled under ships the size of continents. He didn't need armies most of the time, his name alone was enough. The elders in every star cluster warned their young, do not challenge the Eternal One. He sees all. He knows all. And he never forgives. Even the most advanced species in the galaxy, like the Serexi and the Volari, had long accepted their chains, serving Vorlak in exchange for survival. And then came the humans, tiny, bold, and completely unaware of what they were stepping into. At first, they were ignored. Their ships were weak. Their planets were too far. Their technology was like toys compared to Vorlak's empire. But something about them felt different. They didn't bow. They asked too many questions. They refused to follow the usual steps of surrender. In their own corner of the stars, they were growing fast. Colonies popped up near the forbidden zones, and human science ships were spotted scanning ancient ruins left untouched for ages. The Council warned Vorlak, they move too quickly. They don't fear the old stories. They are not like the others. But Vorlak laughed, a deep, terrible sound that made the air freeze around him. Then let them learn, he said, sending a patrol fleet toward the human colony of Vexa 9. It was a peaceful world filled with families and engineers, just beginning to grow into a real city. The humans had named it Hope's Reach. It became nothing more than a memory in less than 6 minutes. The fleet dropped from orbit, released a silent wave of energy, and the entire surface was erased. Not even ash remained. To Vorlak, it was a message: don't step where you don't belong. But he didn't realize someone had been watching. A young human commander named Raylan Cross received the last transmission from Vexa 9, just a flicker of static and a child's scream before silence. That child had been his nephew. That colony had been his brother's dream. And that scream never left his ears. The United Earth Command wanted to avoid conflict. We can't win, they said. We must survive. But Raylan didn't want survival. He wanted answers. He wanted justice. He wanted the galaxy to stop trembling and start questioning. He began collecting everything he could about Vorlak: the myths, the scattered stories from old traders, the strange signals hidden in the background noise of deep space. And what he found didn't match the image of a godlike ruler. It showed something older, something that had not always been powerful. Vorlak had once been just another conqueror, lost in a war that predated every known species. He had found something, an ancient source of power, buried in the ruins of a dead civilization. That power had given him immortality, control over machines, and the ability to bend energy itself. But it was not his. It was stolen. And it had a weakness. Most beings would have ignored such stories. After all, who could fight a being that turned entire worlds into dust with a thought? But humans were strange. They didn't let fear stop them when they believed something could be done. And Raylan believed. He started traveling the galaxy in secret, collecting pieces of technology, building connections with old enemies of Vorlak, and following a trail of whispers that led to one word: Carthan. A planet that had been blacklisted by Vorlak himself. A world where, they said, no ship returned. Raylan knew that was where it all began, and maybe where it could all end. But the galaxy was watching, and so was Vorlak. The Eternal One had felt a disturbance. It was faint, like a shadow in the corner of a vast room, but it was there, a human, moving through places that should have been forgotten. A human not ruled by fear. And for the first time in millennia, Vorlak felt something he had not felt in ages: curiosity. It wasn't power that disturbed him. It was possibility. Because one spark, if left unchecked, could start a fire. And this spark was human. Raylan Cross was no longer just a soldier mourning the loss of his brother. He had become something else, a man with a purpose so dangerous that even whispers of it could cost him his life. After the destruction of Vexa 9, while Earth Command debated diplomacy and compromise, Raylan moved in silence, working beyond their sight. He resigned from his post, vanished from official records, and disappeared into the darker corners of the galaxy where forgotten smugglers, old rebels, and exiled scholars still remembered the time before Vorlek's rule. He did not go looking for weapons, not yet. What he searched for were the lost truths, stories buried under layers of fear and time. He found them in broken archives, in alien libraries, sealed under toxic sands, and in conversations held in secret, far from surveillance drones. One thing kept appearing again and again: Vorlak's rise to power had not been natural. Long ago, before his empire, before the first surrender, there had been a war between godlike beings and a race whose name no one dared to speak. Vorlak had been a soldier in that war, just another conqueror with ambition, until he found something on a planet called Carthan. The texts didn't agree on what it was: a machine, a device, a living crystal, but they all said the same thing: it changed him. It gave him control over energy machines beyond understanding, and with it, he crushed everything in his path. But what caught Raylan's attention was the clue that it could be stopped, not by matching its power, but by disconnecting it from its source. That single idea burned in Raylan's mind like fire in dry grass. He couldn't fight Vorlak with ships or soldiers, but maybe he didn't have to. Maybe he could pull the string that held everything together, but he couldn't do it alone. Raylan knew the kind of people he needed: those with nothing left to lose and just enough hope to try. He found them across scattered planets. Mira, a rogue pilot who once flew smuggling runs through black holes and didn't fear any ruler. Tolan, a scientist who had once worked on Vorlak's weapons before defecting after his home city was turned to glass. And Fix, a mechanic who couldn't speak anymore because of what Vorlak's torturers had done, but who had hands faster than any machine. Together, they were not heroes. They were survivors, broken in different ways, but united by the idea that maybe, just maybe, they could break something far greater than themselves. Their mission began quietly. They avoided battles, skipped through wormholes, hacked ancient maps, and followed a path that seemed impossible. Every step brought more danger. Vorlak's patrols were everywhere, and even the mention of Carthan made old traders go silent. Ships were scanned. Contacts disappeared. But Raylan's determination never cracked. He knew he was racing against time because Vorlak had noticed the tremors in his empire, little glitches in his machines, moments of silence in his network, strange signals that echoed from the edge of known space. He didn't know the source, but he had begun searching. Raylan and his crew reached the edges of Carthan sector through a dust belt of shattered moons and radiation storms. No maps showed this route anymore. The planet itself was locked behind a defense field built by something not even Vorlak understood, but Raylan had found the frequency in a forgotten alien tomb. As they entered Carthan's orbit, everything changed. Their systems flickered. Their minds felt heavy. Something ancient was watching. The surface below was black, lifeless, covered in twisted ruins of a civilization long gone. No wind, no clouds, only silence. And beneath that silence, power raw, humming, and alive. They landed in a crater where the ruins formed a perfect spiral, like a giant machine sunken into the planet. They walked through the stone corridors with weapons ready, passing glowing walls and whispering voices that weren't quite sound. Deep underground, they found it, a massive core, pulsing with energy. This was the source. Not just of Vorlak's power, but of something older, something that remembered what came before. Tolan scanned it. Mira checked the entrance. Fix wired their systems. And Raylan placed his hand on the panel, feeling the heat of 1,000 memories. The core responded. It recognized him not by name, but by purpose. A map opened, showing how the signal spread through the galaxy, how Vorlak's machines were still connected to this ancient pulse, and how if severed it would all fall apart. But as the last line of code revealed itself, Alarms blared. Mira shouted ships. Incoming! Not drones. Not patrols. Him. Vorlak's flagship was descending from the stars, massive and cold, its shadow covering the entire valley. He had found them. And he was coming himself. Raylan's time had run out. But the spark had been lit, and even in the face of death, he refused to let it die. Raylan Cross stood before the ancient core as the heavy sound of approaching dread echoed through the air, and in that moment, he knew they had crossed a line from which there was no return. Vorlak's flagship, a monstrosity of dark metal and silent engines, was not just a machine of war, it was a symbol of absolute control, of a galaxy that had bowed its head in fear for far too long. Now it hovered above Carthan, casting a long and endless shadow over the ruins, as if the planet itself trembled in its presence. Raylan didn't need confirmation. The warlord himself had come, and that meant he wasn't here to threaten, he was here to erase. The ground shook as the first wave of soldiers descended, armored in obsidian suits and carrying weapons that could melt stone. Mira took to the sky in their ship, drawing fire and giving them time. Fix stayed behind, fingers dancing over controls as he worked to upload the shutdown code into the core, while Tolan guarded the entrance with a pulse rifle stolen from the wreckage of an old battlefield. Raylan knew they wouldn't survive if they stayed long. The code needed time, and time was the one thing they didn't have. So, while Fix worked and Tolan defended, Raylan descended deeper into the ruins, following signals no map could show. He believed the answers weren't just in the machine, they were in the forgotten halls of Carthan, a place once sacred, now hidden behind layers of fear and ash. The deeper he went, the stranger things became. The walls whispered in languages that scratched at the edge of understanding, and lights glowed in colors not found in any known spectrum. This wasn't just technology, it was something else alive, aware, ancient beyond all reckoning. And at the very heart of it, he found a chamber unlike anything he had seen. In the center floated a sphere of light, pulsing with energy so strong it made his skin feel weightless. The moment he stepped forward, it reacted to his presence, and memories flooded his mind, not his own, but echoes from a time when giants walked among stars, when Carthan was not a graveyard, but a throne world. He saw Vorlak, young and furious, stumbling upon this power after surviving a battle meant to end him. He had touched the sphere just as Raylan now did, and it had rewritten him, bending his will to the core and feeding his hunger with strength no one else could rival. But it had a weakness, it was never meant to belong to one mind. It needed balance, connection, more than just domination. That was what Raylan realized. Vorlak's control was unnatural, and the core was straining under his command. It was unstable, and if disconnected now, it would not just stop feeding Vorlak, it would destroy everything connected to him. Raylan returned to the surface with fire in his veins. He passed fallen soldiers, Tolan had held them off, but at the cost of his own life. The scientist's body lay in silence, weapons still in hand, eyes open as if watching the stars. Fix was still at the controls, blood running from his mouth, his hands moving slower now, but he looked up at Raylan and nodded. The upload was nearly complete. Mira's voice crackled through the comm, reporting heavy damage but confirming that she had drawn away the flagship's main guns. She couldn't do it for long. Raylan stepped up to the console and completed the last step, his fingers entering the sequence that would tear Vorlak from his source. But just before the final press, the ground split open behind them and Vorlak himself emerged. He wasn't wearing armor, didn't need it. His very presence bent the air, his eyes glowing with raw energy, and his voice carried the weight of 10,000 broken civilizations. He mocked Raylan, not with words, but with silence, walking forward like a god descending into the world of insects. But Raylan didn't step back. He stared into the eyes of the tyrant who had killed his brother, who had ruled through fear and crushed hope wherever it dared to rise. He said only one thing before pressing the final key: "Your time is over." The sphere pulsed, the ground screamed, and the energy that had once obeyed Vorlak began to unravel like smoke torn by wind. The sky split open with violent lightning, machines all across the galaxy faltered, and the flagship above began to fall, its systems blinded. its weapons silenced. Vorlak roared, a sound not of pain but of rage, as the strength that had once made him untouchable drained from his body. He lunged at Raylan, but it was too late. The world had already shifted. The core exploded in a shockwave of light, sending everyone flying. When Raylan awoke, the sky was calm. Fix was gone. Mira landed beside the ruins, her ship barely holding together, her face pale with shock and awe. Vorlak was not dead, but he was no longer a god. Stripped of his unnatural power, weakened and hunted, his empire was crumbling. And as word spread across systems that the forbidden world had been breached and the tyrant had fallen, something else awakened hope. For the first time in generations, people looked to the stars, not with fear, but with the question, what now? Raylan didn't claim victory. He had no interest in thrones or titles. He buried his fallen friends, placed a marker on the edge of the ruins, and watched the stars in silence. But across the galaxy, in whispers and songs, a new legend began to rise of the human who stepped into the forbidden world and returned with fire, not to rule, but to remind the galaxy that freedom could be born from even the deepest darkness. The sky above Carthan had never burned so brightly, yet it was not the light of stars or hope. It was fire, chaos, and the start of something that would echo across the galaxy forever. Mira's ship, battered and scarred, twisted through the black clouds of smoke as enemy cruisers closed in like vultures ready to strike. From orbit, Vorlak's fleet descended in waves, massive warships with shimmering black hulls, shaped like blades designed to pierce the soul of any planet they touched. But now, their target was not just Carthan, it was the heart of rebellion itself. Raylan stood inside the command deck of their last remaining cruiser, eyes locked on the swarm above, his mind sharp and ready. Around him, freedom fighters from shattered colonies took their stations without hesitation. These were not trained soldiers, but survivors, dreamers, and desperate warriors who had seen too much and lost even more. They had nothing left to protect except the dream that Vorlak could fall, and that dream was now alive in the fire of battle. Ships collided above the ruins where the core had once pulsed, exchanging plasma blasts and streaks of light, painting the sky with destruction. Each explosion was a heartbeat, each scream of metal a cry for something greater than revenge. Mira's voice cut through the calm but urgent shield arrays dropping. You've got 60 seconds until they break through. Raylan didn't blink. All fighters formed the V-strike. Target their command relay. If we cut that, we cut their eyes. Engines roared as small, fast ships broke from the formation, diving into the storm like knives aimed at the dark heart of the fleet. From orbit, the flagship watched, silent and still, waiting for the right moment to strike, but Raylan knew Vorlak wasn't up there anymore. The warlord had come down during the collapse of the core, and that meant the fleet above was running on pre-programmed tactics. Cold. Efficient. Predictable. And predictable could be broken. Fix's last transmission had revealed a gap in their sensor network, one weak node hidden in the northern arc of their defense wall. If they could punch through it, they could blind the entire left flank and force the enemy to retreat or fall into confusion. Raylan's ship took the lead, shields flickering under fire as energy bolts slammed into the hull. One mistake would mean death, but hesitation was not an option. Behind him, two Allied cruisers followed, weaving through debris and fire. They hit the weak node, hard Mira's ship, diving in low, unleashing everything they had. The node sparked, trembled, then shattered in a wave of blue static, and immediately the fleet above staggered. Enemy ships drifted slightly, formations split, and for a brief moment, they were no longer one united storm, they were just machines without sight. Raylan seized the moment. Now, full thrust. Break their center. His voice was met with a chorus of roars, cheers, and cries of desperation. Fighters surged forward, weaving between wreckage and broken hulls, hitting the command relays and energy cores like hammers. One by one, the enemy ships fell, some exploding in silence, others spinning into the void like shattered bones. But victory was not without cost. The Allied cruisers were falling too. Raylan watched in silence as one of their ships, mid-turn, and vanished in a flash of light. He closed his eyes for a second, just one, then looked forward again. They were almost there. But then the flagship moved. It turned slowly, like something waking from a deep sleep, and its main cannon, an ancient weapon powered by core light, began to glow. One shot from that, and Carthan would become nothing but memory. Mira's voice came again, weaker now. I'll draw it away. You go for the cannon. Before Raylan could stop her, she dove headfirst toward the flagship, dodging beam after beam. Her ship took 2 hits, engines failing, smoke trailing behind her, but she didn't stop. She got close enough to fire a volley straight into the side of the flagship, damaging the targeting system just as the cannon fired and missed. Mira's ship was gone. Silence filled the comms for a second. Then Raylan whispered, "We end this now." He turned the cruiser toward the cannon and locked onto the exposed energy core. Shields were gone. Weapons overheated. But he had one last shot left. As enemy fire tore through the sides of the ship, as alarms screamed and the crew braced for impact, Raylan activated the override and launched the final charge directly into the glowing heart of the weapon. The blast was instant, massive, and final. The flagship cracked open like a dying star, its pieces scattering into the void. All across the battlefield, the enemy fleet froze, then began to flee, blind and leaderless. The skies grew quiet, and the fires slowly faded. The battle above Carthan was over, and against every law of war, every rule of power, the humans had won. Not with numbers, not with superior technology, but with bravery, sacrifice, and the unshakable belief that even a shadow that big could fall. Raylan stood on the bridge, bleeding and exhausted, but he didn't smile. Too many lives had been lost. Too many voices would never speak again. But Carthan was free, and the message was clear: humanity was not just alive, it was unbreakable. No one in the galaxy remembered Earth anymore. It was just a forgotten blue dot in the archives of ancient star maps, a planet that had once tried to rise but fell into silence before it could leave a mark. But that silence was shattered the day a single human arrived at the Galactic Assembly, uninvited, unnoticed until it was too late. His name was Kale, and he didn't come with weapons or ships. He came alone, in a small shuttle barely held together, carrying nothing but an old translator chip and a piece of cloth marked with Earth's fading symbol. The guards laughed when they saw him, the delegates ignored him, and the council didn't even bother to ask who he was. To them, he was just another desperate species trying to survive. But Kyle didn't beg. He stood in front of the most powerful rulers of the galaxy, creatures with minds that could crush stars, empires that had lasted for thousands of years, and said 10 words that froze the room: "You forgot us. Now we're back. And we remember." No one took him seriously at first. Why would they? Humanity was extinct, erased during the time of Purge, when the Great Alliance had declared Earth unfit for survival after one of its colonies refused to obey galactic law. Back then, Earth had no fleet, no voice, and no allies. They were easy to destroy. But now, Kyle stood there alive, fearless, and burning with something no one understood. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply asked questions, dangerous ones. Who gave you the right to choose who lives or dies? What if your power wasn't real, only feared? What if one forgotten human could remind the galaxy what rebellion looked like? The council grew uneasy. Delegates whispered. Spies were sent to find the truth about Earth, and what they found was terrifying. Earth wasn't dead. It had gone silent on purpose. Hidden beneath its ruined cities were underground labs, massive vaults of knowledge, and a new generation born in shadows, trained not to conquer but to survive anything. They had learned from every species, copied every weapon, broken every code, and waited. For centuries. And Kale was the first to step out of hiding. A messenger. A spark. The galaxy didn't know how to react. Some laughed. Some watched. Some planned to kill him. But every time someone tried, they failed. Kale always knew what was coming, like he could read their minds. He walked into danger like it was home, and he spoke with a voice that made even the oldest species stop and listen. What scared them most wasn't what Kyle did, it was what followed. Planets with no history of rebellion suddenly lit up with resistance. Oppressed species, who had lived as slaves for generations, began to rise. Kale never ordered them. He simply told them stories about Earth's fall, Earth's pain, and Earth's unbreakable will. He reminded them what freedom felt like, even if they had never known it. And soon, the words "he is human" were no longer a joke, they were a warning. The Alliance sent assassins, but they vanished. They offered him peace, but he refused. They offered him power, but he laughed. Kale didn't want a throne, he wanted truth. He exposed the crimes hidden by the Council, revealed secrets about vanished species, and uncovered ancient lies buried beneath the stars. Every secret he revealed became a fire, and soon the galaxy was burning with questions. On the world of Grath, he faced the Mind King and broke its control network with a single hacked pulse. On the moons of Zira, he helped 1,000 bioslaves escape without firing a shot. On the battlefield of Salura Prime, he stood in front of a firing squad and said, "You can shoot me, but you'll never kill what I started." The soldiers put down their weapons. That day, 20 systems broke away from the Council. The galaxy began to change, piece by piece, because one man refused to stop speaking. Even his enemies began to fear the silence after his voice. Kale's face was everywhere: holograms, statues, warnings. Some saw him as a savior, others as a threat, but none could ignore him. The Council called an emergency session and declared him a universal criminal, placing the highest bounty in history on his head. But no one came to claim it. Not because they were loyal, but because they had heard his words. And those words made them question everything. The truth Kale carried was heavier than any weapon, and the hope he lit in people's hearts could not be extinguished by fear. In time, the Council fell, not with war, but with collapse. Leaders fled, alliances shattered, and a new order began to rise. Not an empire. Not a kingdom. Something stranger. Something more dangerous. A galaxy that remembered what it meant to think freely. At the center of it all was Kyle, the human who never ruled, never conquered, but changed everything. No one knows where he went after the fall. Some say he returned to Earth, now hidden again behind its dead skies. Others say he walks among the stars, still watching, still waiting for the next spark. But one thing is certain: in every corner of the galaxy, in every voice that dares to speak against tyranny, in every small act of rebellion, his legacy lives. And when people ask who started it all, who dared to challenge gods and kings, who reminded them what it meant to be alive, they say his name: Kyle, the human who changed everything.